thing that we have to do is that's going to help us get probably to those higher consciousness levels, is to realize that we do have these ascended masters and ascended ones that are unconditional loving and can show us how to get there, that we need to embrace and open our hearts to come into our lives, where we stop the bickering, where we stop the narcissistic trickle down corporate stuff to the greed and the money. You know, the bottom line to everything is money. And that's sad, because that's a material, that's totally 3D. And it's made us depend on that in order to get our freedom out there. So we need to somehow, wouldn't it be great if we could barter? And if there were real, you know, there were honest energies that kept us in the means to keep the barter. Now barters, my husband always said, the barter system never works between two people. Somebody always feels like they get the short end of the stick. And he was right. And I tried it a couple of times, and it almost needs to be a higher energy in there to weigh it if people are going to do that. And I don't think we're there, but that would be wonderful if we could live like that. It's kind of a fantasy. But that's all I have to say. And I'm ready to pass the baton. I just think that we also need to include that.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. TJ, you've got the talking stick. You can talk about whatever you want to. We're free flow here. Take it away.
Okay. Well, I'd like to talk about emotional intelligence, because in order to fix this problem, we're going to have some solutions. And regardless of how I was trained militaristically or educationally, or the fact that I was privileged, because that's what I've been told, because I was in white skin by a black man when I was in Hawaii, and I was it was in a discussion. It was a debate of some men that were alcoholics, and my husband at the time, I worked for the United States Navy, and I was in personnel information security, but I met the man. He's deceased now, but he was in the GS-13 type, but he ran a halfway. And the black man told me I was privileged. So I asked him to explain that. So he explained to me, being born white and educated, that I had a responsibility. And he talked from a place of, I still have the vision, as Karen says, she sees visions, but even though he's passed and my husband's passed, I can see the black man sitting when you walk down steps in this old house in Pahaku, on Pahaku Street in Oahu, where we had the halfway house. But we had the men that would be behind bars in prison trying to get back in, staying in our house. We had like 13 rooms. But this man told me, and I didn't know how to take it, because I wasn't in my uniform. I was my husband's wife, but because we ran the house for the men that were trying to get back into the prison because they were fed better, we hired a chef that wore white clothes with a big hat. But he told me, and then I explained to him I was raised by a black lady that instilled some beautiful things I couldn't get from anybody else, because she told me she educated me about, because she lived over in the shotgun houses in the black area. And back then, when I was little, they called it in-town, and I won't say the word, because she taught me what
right.
I offended. She said anybody could be an N-word, and y'all know what I mean. So she taught me emotional intelligence, and she taught me how to be smart, and she taught me how to feel things. My grandmother, bless both of them, Elizabeth, Sarah, and Sarah, they were Sarahs, but they taught me to be spiritual, not religious, but to be spiritual. Neither, they went to church occasionally, but they'd dress up, an old lady, long down mid-length, and my great-grandmother, my great-grandmother was a Richmond. She was a school teacher in Missouri to Indians, but she was always helping people, and they would help gypsies coming through in Louisiana, Monroe. But the emotional intelligence part of it is what we're going to have to deal with. Now, we can have theories about everything, but part of it's being educated. Al Sharpton did point that out. And by the way, that little girl, he said, came up and said something like War and Peace or Peace and Justice, I think is what she said. He was,
Peace and Justice.
Peace and Justice. Yeah. So because he was ready to, take offense like I'm talking about I've had to do, and it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But I was discriminated against while I was in Hawaii. And then I'm going to tell you real quick, and then I'll let it alone because I believe it's about us getting along, emotional intelligence, and that we've got to fix this because we have to educate everybody, which I think Al Sharpton did a darn good job. But I know he had to use what we call sound bites, and Janet wants me to learn more about communication and sound bites to help her in the future. But I'm just telling you, from my personal experiences, I've got a mixed model, and emotional intelligence is something we all need to look at in psychology, and you can look it up on Wikipedia, emotional intelligence, EI, and there's emotional leadership, which is part of the solution. That's EL, emotional quotient, EQ, and emotional intelligence quotient, EIQ. And there's going to be psychology involved, university. A lot of people say that, only the devil's in that, and a lot of groups don't believe in anything to do with psychiatry, or healing in the but we are all about our conscious, and I'd like to maybe in the last 30 minutes or so we can talk about our higher selves and coming to the planet, since I've died a couple of times, and Janet and I were talking about consciousness and our soul and self. And, I've been doing a lot of soul searching because I've been sick at my stomach over all this, so I know people are empathic. I am a hermit. I'm now a widow. I'm going to be 69. I'm not looking forward to being 70, but I talked to a good friend of mine, Newton Schwartz, I met him in 1970, right before I was pregnant, and he took me in and let me manage a place in Houston when I was barefoot and pregnant, and I stayed that way, folks. So I've been called dumb and barefoot and pregnant, had to go get a GED, but I started making straight A's. I may not have cared too much in elementary and high school. I made A's and B's and C's maybe. If I made a D, it was usually in something stupid because I just didn't apply myself because I was a social creature. But as I got older, I learned introvert and extrovert, and I took tests, and I would have been an excellent judge according to the university test I took. But I did wind up at the university for all you international people. But I've been part of American Culture International Relations, and I'm proud. And I was ambassador for of goodwill for Houston, and I've come a long way globally. And I drove a truck coast to coast. I've had a lot, but I'd like to talk about the soul. And Janet and Karen and me, and if we have a different way to talk, but I'm going to ask people if they want to join me as friends, if they want to talk about who they really are, their awareness, and the inner self that knows when you close your eyes or when you're in trouble. Who do you go to? Who do you pray to, or do you? Are you an atheist, agnostic? I'm a theocrat, I believe. And I heard one of the men in the George Floyd down in Houston. I lived in Houston, so I know where Floyd was from, George III. But I'm going to say this, because this is so symbolic in my world that I work in extraterrestrial with the Avatar Masters and the Ascended Masters. And having died, having firsthand experience with those on the other side and in groups, extraterrestrial groups here on the planet, we come and go as hybrids. But as we take on the Avatar Master world, one of the things you can see is the re-symbolized in our ACE Folklife group is George Floyd was symbolized as a black man, his container. But do you think he agreed to what he did at the higher levels because we agreed, or do we not? But these are things we can do as armchair philosophers. But he's like a black Jesus, and the poor men on top of him could be, all five of those men could be all called to duty to represent that because it's changed the world. It has changed the world, and it's not going to stop. So emotional intelligence.
I'm back.
Okay. Am I done?
I'm sorry. I got booted. I got back in. Probably time's up. I didn't quite catch what you said. Sounds great. I'm so sorry. I was booted. And Karen, are you still on? You didn't get booted,
I'm still
did you?
Here. No.
Okay. Sorry about that. I got booted. But I'll have to listen to that in the show. Okay, so you had mentioned something you want to talk about. It is the last half hour of the show. What was the subject you want us to focus on? The last half hour of the show. Do you guys have a preference, both of you? We can do a round where we all answer the same question.
I was mentioning emotional intelligence, but I'm sure Karen and her groups, spiritual groups in her community, and hypnotizing, and we could talk about the intelligence, but also the validity of our soul. Because the three of us have a higher level of evolvement. We don't believe we're better than it. Quite the opposite. We're talking about lower level containers and skin, but emotional. How we deal with emotions, and I've seen a lot of people fight. And one thing about this time on the planet, I'm not going to blame the president because he's my commander in chief, and I'm sorry I wore a uniform, but we all have this thing, and this Metis, one of the guys is talking about him. But what's happened is, we don't do politics and religion, but we do spirituality, and I'd like to talk from the soul level. We all got a soul, folks, and I would hate to be the president of the United States of America because that's the most powerful position on this planet. But I get to be above all that. You could say a lot higher levels in intelligence, okay? Community. I get to be a soul that's died and come and died. So they call those ascension masters. So I'm going to go back to Janet. But ascension masters and the awareness of your intelligence level, Janet, and I'll mute.
Okay. I'm aware. I don't know exactly how it was, but I did years of therapy and reflection and introspection and working on myself because I'm very emotional and I'm affected by everything. I'm very empathetic, and so I think that's one of the things our poor president is he lacks empathy, and I've been trying to study, how is it that some people are more sociopathic and narcissistic and lack empathy, but the poor people that are in those categories are confused about emotions because all they can do is try to copy other people's emotions, but they're not really feeling it. And I have a lot of friends that are autistic. They weren't ever diagnosed. They're adults. They're dealing with it. And, they tend to piss me off because, you don't feel me. But, I've learned to deal with it. And I go, okay, what does that feel like for them that they're not able to feel things like other people can feel? So I've developed some empathy for Trump, and he just doesn't get it. He doesn't feel it. I wish people would help him out somehow, but by the time you're in your 70s, you don't want to be told what to do. So we have to learn how to protect humanity. One of my things in therapy is it's always you have to protect yourself. And if you're a parent, you have to protect your children, and you don't allow them to be abused. So we have a society that's suffering from PTSD because as a society we are not selecting leaders that are not sociopathic, and that happened with Hitler, that we had Napoleon, we've had Genghis Khan. We have these people that rise to power that really, if you were a conscious civilized civilization where you were objectively finding your leadership based on their qualities and qualifications, they would have to take an emotional intelligence test, and they couldn't even run for office unless they could pass an emotional intelligence test, which shows you the appropriate response in situations. So when I was in college, I forgot to do the timer. Okay, let me look at it. When I was in college, and I never got a degree. I went back after years. Couldn't go when I was young because we had to get my brother, so he didn't have to go to Vietnam. So anyway, long story. But what I learned in Psychology 101, and I had to take psychology 3 or 4 times, and then I married a psychologist. And so is that they have a basic evaluation system. So one of the tests was, what would you do if you murdered someone and then somebody knocked on your door? And I forget, it was like, select one of the following. And like one of the options was, well, you'd hide the body, or, there's different scenarios. You'd chop the body up, you would confess, So these questions can be asked, and then you get a score on your emotional intelligence. And too often or not, I've encountered people that would hide the body and cut it up in pieces and try not to get found out. It's like, well,